So we need to keep it clean, and this will be up sometime tomorrow morning. I'll shoot out an email when it goes out, and so hopefully all that works out well. So I think this is an important webinar because as Mike McCabe and Nate Tim and I traveled the state last month, we went to Wausau, we went to Fort Atkinson, we went to Eau Claire, and we've been to Racine, Kenosha. We heard, in Green Bay, and we heard a lot of similar discussions, not only about framing, but also this whole idea of the rural divide and the urban divide and such. And what's really interesting is when you get right down to it, there's more that connects us than divides us. And unfortunately, when we start using the old playbook of things that don't work, we end up dividing ourselves with issues and things like that. And I think that's one of the reasons why when Democrats and progressives watch Donald Trump, he so offends our sense of not only values, but how we feel about issues, that it really prompts us cognitively to just want to strike back instead of thinking about how we can provide a different message and a kind of a better view for the future. So without any further ado, I'm going to activate the screen sharing here. So you should all be able to see the screen. If you have a question, obviously, please ask as we go along. I can activate it. Or there's the chat window up here. You can just, I'll do it here quick. Type a question here. Oh, I misspelled question. You get the idea. So there we go. So I titled this, What Are People Thinking and Why Does It Matter? Because very simply, we need to start listening to people, and we need to start thinking in terms of values and why it matters in terms of what they're saying, and not responding to each and every issue basically on its own. So thinking in terms of values. And obviously listening is critical to the communications process. It can't be a one-way street. And when we really start listening to people, some of this seems elementary, but in politics, you really have to say it, because otherwise people, again, just get reactive and defensive. So in terms of changing public discourse and coming together around shared values, we have to understand why people believe and care what they do and what affects them. We also have to start understanding the moral frame, which again, if we don't listen, we're not going to hear that moral frame. And then the biggest thing coming out of all that is to understand how to reframe using shared values. And I've got some examples of shared values coming up. And when we listen, when we really listen to what people are saying and what they care about, it prevents us from falling into some common traps. And over the last few months traveling around the state, I've heard a lot of these common traps that people think about and respond with just unconsciously. It's second nature. And here's a list of some of them. I'm sure you can come up with more. The first one is thinking of conservatives as being mean, greedy, and stupid. You know, if their position on a certain issue is something that we completely disagree with, it's really simple to just write it off as them just being mean, greedy, and stupid, and not actually listening to what they care about. Secondly, thinking that everyone shares our worldview. And obviously, everyone on this webinar tonight has enough experience in framing and listening to me and listening to George Lakoff and others. And we know that not everyone shares our worldview, not just in politics, but in the world in general. Thirdly, thinking that voters are just uninformed or that they're voting against their own interests, when in fact they're actually voting for what they care about. They're not voting the way they do because they're stupid. There's a reason they're motivated to vote the way they do. Fourth, thinking that we can win on issues. This is a common trap, and in fact, if you do a review of the 2014 strategy analysis from the Democratic Party of Wisconsin and that catastrophic election, you'll see that they actually talk about being able to win on issues and not understanding why they can't win elections if they win on issues. And I would say that we're not winning on issues. We are not dominating public discourse on issues, conservatives are. And then finally, this is the biggest one, when you talk about bringing people together and the idea of the urban-rural divide, is that we end up dividing ourselves because of different issues, because of different language, and again, this whole idea of issue silos is critical to that. So I want to just look briefly at this rural and urban divide, because it's something that, again, has been talked about a lot. And the Marquette poll from this month, actually, if you go into the crosstabs, and I'll put the document for the crosstabs on my website when I post this, along with the PowerPoint you're looking at here, so you have the links, you have all the documents. When you look at that poll, you're seeing some large divides between rural and urban Wisconsin. And thankfully, the Marquette poll is a well-structured poll, and the crosstabs give us insights deeper into the questions, including separating out the questions by rural, suburban, and urban. And what we see is there are large divides between rural and urban Wisconsin in terms of candidate support, in terms of issue support, but more importantly for our purposes, there's this disconnect on values. And what I found, and which I'll show you in a moment here, is that in the rural areas of Wisconsin, which is most of the state, and I don't think anybody can argue that if there's going to be any hope of reclaiming some progressive values and progressive representation in the legislature, we need the rural vote. It's critically important. You're not going to change the politics in Wisconsin just by winning in Milwaukee and Madison. So the conservative frame is extremely dominant in rural Wisconsin. And then in urban and suburban areas, which you can pretty much pinpoint to the Milwaukee metro area, the Madison-Dane County metro area, and the Fox Valley, you find very, very broadly biconceptual progressives. You find people that tend to be progressive on some social issues besides abortion, and then you find people who are conservative on the economy and safety and security and things like that. And let's just look at what this really good poll tells us about rural conservatives and this idea of urban-suburban biconceptuals, which really reinforces the idea that I first heard Mike McCabe talk about, and that is that the Democratic Party has turned into the party of the urban elite. And that, as all of you know, reinforces this conservative metaphor of the liberal elite. And it reinforces that type of not only metaphor, but the frame. And I want to look at two questions and the crosstabs from the poll. One asks about discrimination against blacks, and the other one is this question about if blacks would only try harder, they could do better. And what it shows is actually a pretty broad base of conservative dominance in Wisconsin, even in areas that we would consider to be progressive and democratic, which leads to this idea of urban-suburban biconceptuals and why we need to come together not on issues but on values. So here's the first question, and this is the exact phrasing of the question here. Just grab a drink of water quick. Make sure to stay hydrated. It's hot out. So here's the question. There is a lot of discrimination against blacks in the U.S. today, limiting their chances to get ahead. So that I would not consider that to be a progressively framed question. I would consider it to be a little biconceptual, because you have this idea of discrimination and that it's unfair because it limits their chances to get ahead, and you're actually yes, you should be able to see a presentation. Hold on a second. Let me just make sure that it's being shared properly. You should be able to see a presentation now. You should be able to see a PowerPoint slide with some green and yellow figures on it. Hold on a second. Let's just do this quickly. Let me just try and do a quick reset here and see if I can. Oh, you have it now. Okay, good. Okay, thanks, Steve and Nancy. And okay, it looks like people are seeing it. Okay, good. So let's get back to the PowerPoint here. Well, now it's gone. Hold on a second. Okay, you should be able to see it now. So let me just take a minute and make sure. So you're not seeing the PowerPoint at this point? That's odd. Okay. Okay, my apologies for that. If you can't, let me try. Okay, hold on one second. Let me do this. How's that look? Okay, are we good now? Sorry for this. Okay, hold on a second. I'm going to just close the PowerPoint. One second here. Okay, I'm going to close the PowerPoint. I'm going to stop the screen share. I'm just going to like do a relaunch of the screen sharing here. Maybe something just didn't take here. Just give me a moment. Continue to just let you know. So the reason I don't think that question is it's kind of biconceptually framed is that it basically it's dealing with one specific group of people, not trying to get empathy. It is somewhat getting empathy, but then it's dealing with a specific group. So, okay, my PowerPoint is opening up now. There we go. Now, let me try launching the screen share. Okay. How are we doing on that? Are you seeing? You saw the title page, it's gone. Okay. think I'm going to go back to seem to be having some problems with the PowerPoint here. How about the screen sharing now? Now you should be able to see the PowerPoint. I may just leave it in this mode because it seems like this might be better. Just me. This is very odd. Okay, this is not an issue that I've had in the past, obviously. Okay, I'm going to leave it up for a moment here and see if this, maybe it's just the system catching up. So let me know if you now see, I mean, you're probably seeing the whole toolbar, but I think this is safer and you can definitely see what's going on. So if you see the question 45, there's a lot of discrimination against blacks in the U.S. today, limiting their chances to get ahead. And then the green and yellow bars, Steve and Nancy say nope. Okay. And yeah, just me. Okay. I'm turning the screen share off. Let's see. Oh, now you have it? Now you have it. Okay, thank you. Okay, good. Thanks for your patience. So, yeah, that's fine. I'm going to leave it at the whole PowerPoint screen. Yeah, I'm going to leave it like that. I don't want to mess with a good thing as long as everybody can see it. So we'll just leave it there. So good. Thank goodness. Okay, so to continue, so you see the question. So on your left, you see the urban strongly agreeing with the statement that there's a lot of discrimination against blacks in the U.S. today, limiting their chances to get ahead. So you see this kind of empathetic view being dominant, with 65% of people agreeing. Surprisingly, in urban areas, 35% of the people still disagree with that. And that number goes even higher in suburban areas and up to 44% in rural Wisconsin. And I mean, that demonstrates that there is a strong streak of conservative frame going there where people don't agree or are not empathetic for the lack of opportunity and freedom that people have because of discrimination. So, you know, you see that coming out in even in the urban areas, which we would think would be much more strongly progressive. So there is an aspect of biconceptualism there, and it's even stronger when you look at a more conservatively framed question. So look, it's a matter of some people not trying hard enough. If blacks would only try harder, they could be as well off as whites. And this is a question that will actually show you where the strongest conservative streaks in the conservative frame is being evoked. And you see, look at the urban. I'll just go back to the previous. You know, you would think that the urban would be similar to question 45, but it's not. It's actually, you know, a more conservative, agreeing with a more conservative statement, again, showing those streaks of biconceptualism. Interestingly enough, it's the suburban where it stays pretty much the same. So there are, surprisingly, slightly more progressive biconceptuals in the suburban areas. But look at rural Wisconsin. It's a virtual 50-50 split, which means that there is, while there's a lot of conservative people in rural Wisconsin, there's also a strong streak of progressive biconceptualism that causes people to disagree with those statements. So you can see how framing really can change the tone of the response from people. So let's look at what this means for candidates, right? So based on where stronger conservative framing is and where it's alive and well, and where you have biconceptual streaks, we can kind of predict what this means for candidates. And it's a little bit, again, it's a little bit predictable. So you look at Feingold is green, Johnson is yellow, and obviously in the urban, stronger biconceptual progressives, you see strong support for Russ Feingold. A little bit less so in the suburban areas where you have stronger conservative biconceptuals who may be a little bit progressive on a few issues. Good. Yeah, green and gold. That's really funny, Don. I didn't even think about that. Thanks for pointing that out now. I'm going to have to be more conscientious about the colors I choose. And then in the rural, of course, the stronger conservative frame being active there. And again, some biconceptual progressives. So this really shows us something in terms of, how people react and how people respond. And yeah, green versus being yellow, right? Because Republicans are evoking fear all over the place. Good point, Don. And now look at president in Clinton versus Trump. Here you see, and I'm going to point out the percentages here because it points out something I'll get to in a little bit here. But look at the percentages in the urban area. You're not getting that 60+% support for Hillary Clinton, right? Not the strongest evoking of the progressive frame. So weaker support amongst progressives. Very similar occurrence in the suburban area, and then of course in the rural areas you're seeing much stronger support for the more conservative frame and thus the conservative candidate. And what I wanted to point out was, and I've mentioned this previously, is this idea of people not voting, having two very negative campaigns going after each other, not a lot of positive progressive messaging coming out of the Clinton campaign, more of the not Trump. And look at the percentages. You don't have to be a math whiz to see that you're not getting, let me just go back to, the same for, the Senate campaign. You're not getting the near 100% that we saw in the polling questions. When you look at the candidates, particularly for president, you're not seeing near 100%. We're seeing in the 70s and 80s. That's not a good sign for turnout. And not a good sign for turnout means that, okay, maybe Russ Feingold wins, but what happens in the rural Wisconsin Assembly and Senate races? That's going to be a big deal. So taking all that into account, that if we really listen to people, that what people care about is the same thing, and it's not issues. I would encourage you to go to the Guardian website. They've had this Voices of America survey project going on for quite some time. And one of the features very early on was this idea of what we learned. And they're talking to people all over the country, young, old, diverse groups of people, Republican, Democrat, progressive, conservative. And I have some quotes here. The link is good. You'll have it when you get the PowerPoint. Just some really important points that I want to get to, because they talked about issues, but then they concluded that people aren't making decisions in terms of specific issues. The race has been epitomized by voters who feel that politicians and the media just don't listen to them. Right? Again, this goes back to the whole Bernie Sanders phenomenon. people, particularly young people, thought that he was listening to them. They felt that he was listening and he cared about them. That's not the case right now with the one nominee, one presumptive nominee. The second one is a significant part of the American electorate that they talked to did not spend their time being obsessed with whatever the candidate's issues du jour were. Right? So people aren't getting stuck on these issues. They're talking about things that really matter to them. Here's another good one. Americans have more in common than we give them credit for. This goes to what Mike McCabe talks about all the time, and about shared values. And it doesn't take a degree in political science to understand that politics can have real effects on people's lives, right? And that is what they care about, and that's their values. And then the idea, it's common to suggest that certain people are voting against their own interests, right? But it takes a lot of chutzpah to believe that they're motivated by a single issue. And we know that's just not the case, right? It's not people voting against their self-interest. That's conventional wisdom. That's what is basically passes for common sense, right? But they're not motivated by a single issue. And then I love this this line here that they talk about all these people, and that there's a reason that they care about the things they care about. And if you really listen to them, they can tell you why they care about those issues, and so can anyone else. So I just think that's a great example of what we're talking about here. So what happens when you abandon values for issues, right? We see the result of that. It allows for message dominance. It allows for, as Don alluded to with his comment about the color yellow, it allows for a message of fear to dominate in the absence of the message of hope. And there was one article that they interviewed people about vitriol in American politics holding the nation back. And here are some quotes. These are actual quotes from voters that they talked to. And again, it runs the gamut of people. You know, they're trying to turn people against one another because of all these specific issues, right? And I love this line, freedom is a part of our legacy. Right? This person is not talking about freedom in the conservative frame. This person is not talking about the freedom to do whatever you want to do without regard for anyone else. This is actually talking about we have a responsibility to protect those freedoms for everybody. That's a beautiful line, and it shows that the progressive idea of freedom is alive and well. Here's another one, respect, civility, and dignity. Things have devolved so badly, we don't see each other's positions, we don't even listen to each other. And I'm just going to throw out a question there. I mean, the conservative frame fosters those things, it reinforces those things because of a lack of something. You know, when you stop listening to people, when you don't see and respect each other's positions, that's a lack of this value. So all the more reason to reinforce this value, and hopefully you all know what I'm talking about. So the third one is they're talking about mass incarceration, right, for so many just ridiculous things, right? And what does that do? It tears apart families, ruins people's livelihoods, their careers, their jobs. It's incredible how bad it is. This person is experiencing empathy, right? Again, something that we need to communicate, you know, empathy about the mass incarceration of people for just basically arbitrary reasons. So very important in terms of countering the vitriol. And then I love this line, we need to get more people involved in the process, more people voting, and a lot of young people aren't registering to vote. You know, that gets directly to participation, right? A message of hope so that people engage in the process. So, you know, very important stuff connecting when you listen and you look at polls, not just to decide, you know, to look at, ooh, who's you know, whatever group going to vote for. No, what does that mean for your message? So Another important kind of survey they did was this idea of people feeling disenfranchised, primarily about money and its influence on elections. And this whole idea that politics are corrupt, right? And that translates to government, right? That people feel that government is corrupt. And in some cases it is. But the more people that engage in it, the more people that vote, the more people who become vested in politics and government, the more we can have a responsible, effective government that actually works for the people. So this message is important. And look at what people are saying. It makes people who are supposed to be courageous meek when they have a super PAC that's going to attack them and bring them down within their own party. This was a state representative from, I believe it was Texas, talking, right? That money in politics makes people meek when they should be courageous and represent the people, because they're afraid of a super PAC that's going to take them down. So we have messages that can counter that. This one is really great because it talks about this idea that money became no substitute for personality. And Jeb Bush was a perfect example of that, culminating in the rally where he had to basically beg people, okay, please clap for me now. There's no money that can overcome an authentic messenger that has an effective message and is communicating well with people and engaging with them. And then there's this idea from Howard Dean that at the presidential level, super PACs don't matter that much. They spend so much money on television, which is one of the worst ways to reach voters. And I wanted to put that in there because it really reinforces the idea that Nate, Tim, and Mike McCabe and I have been putting out there that, look, if you want to defeat money, you engage with the voters. You get into the communities and you start building community connections to win elections with the people. That overcomes money because people don't trust what they see or hear on TV. And this is a great example of that. And then the next one is the fourth bullet point there is somebody commented that people know it's a fixed system. And following up with this idea that there's no way to combat the top, but we can re-empower the bottom, right? But the only way we're going to re-empower the bottom is to give people hope that their engagement in the system can fix it, right? If people don't have hope and the only message is fear and vote for me because I'm not this bad guy over here, then what hope does that give people to engage in the system so it can be fixed? So it becomes this vicious cycle, as this person alluded to. So framing can address this as well. So all of this stuff, when you boil it all down, and the messages and the frames for both parties are well established now and what the message is going to be moving forward. So this is the most recent Pew Research Center poll from July, just a couple weeks ago, and it's shocking to me, actually. And I think it reinforces the idea that the Marquette poll showed that this could be a very low turnout election. And we need to start building momentum now to start following up between now and the end of the election with positive progressive messages, engaging at the community levels. So 15% of the Sanders supporters said that they will not vote for Clinton. And in the Pew poll, they said that that the results could be slightly skewed. It could be more than this because they felt that people were hesitant to say that they wouldn't vote for Clinton, and they were hesitant to admit that they would either not vote or vote for Trump because there's the personal embarrassment factor, and they were doing personal calls, not a robocall, so they were talking to a human being. And the Pew Research Center felt that this could actually be underreported. So let's just take it for face value. 9% are going to vote for Trump. 6% are going to vote for someone else or not going to vote. Yeah, that's a big deal. That's a big deal in a close election, and it has huge implications for down ballot races. Second point is 35% of the people believe that neither Trump or Clinton are trustworthy. I mean, over a third of the people polled don't think that either candidate are trustworthy, and more to the point of people believing that the system is rigged, almost a quarter of them don't believe any one of those candidates will change the influence of money in politics, right? So we see that irrespective of Trump saying, I'm the anti-system candidate, and Clinton saying, I'm more qualified and better than Donald Trump, you see these numbers of people are feeling that their values aren't reflected, right? And it's because our values bring us together. And as the Marquette poll showed, a lot of people are biconceptual. A lot of people believe in progressive values, and these people are feeling politically homeless because they don't hear this message. So this is a message that we need to communicate. So here's my bottom line for tonight. Okay, there's a bunch of people on this call, and you're all over the state, and you've heard me say this before, but I think being engaged with not only what I'm doing, but what Mike McCabe is doing with Blue Jay Nation and the Wisconsin Grassroots Network, and creating these pockets of hope in communities based on these 4 values that can be nonpartisan. You will find many Republicans who agree with these principles. Okay, the first one is, with great freedom comes great responsibility. Many, many people will believe that. The second one is, and I think that one's self-explanatory. I think the great freedom comes great responsibility is the idea that I'm not free if all of my neighbors and brothers and sisters in the community aren't free. So that's a very simple concept. The second one is the idea that when the democracy succeeds, when we act with empathy, not just in our own self-interest. Again, I think a lot of people would agree with that. Democracy doesn't work, as we are witnessing, when you have a bunch of people, the 1%, acting in their own self-interest. So this is, again, something that many Republicans would agree with. Thirdly, our private life and prosperity depend on the public. Again, use the Elizabeth Warren example. You know, roads, bridges, schools, cell phones, the internet, public health research, you know, all the things that we do for each other that we couldn't do on our own, you know, and that's what makes for a prosperous life. And then finally, let's reclaim the idea of the public, the idea of government, right? The idea of why our elected officials are there. And it's a responsibility to protect and empower the people they serve. And again, certainly many Republicans would agree with that principle. And obviously it's open for questions and discussion, but what I want to get to is this idea that if you're a candidate, or if you are working for an issue advocacy group, or you are going door to door, or talking to people in coffee shops about the things you care about, is to lead off with those ideas, right? Don't say, you know, I want to, you know, what do you think about public education? What do you think about voucher schools or publicly subsidized private schools? How are you going to? Don't lead off with that issue, because the issue may create an immediate unconscious barrier, right? Start talking to people about what freedom means to you, or what democracy means to you, or how, you know, you actually take pride in paying your taxes because it's an investment in everybody else in the community, and we have a great community because of it. Something like that. I mean, think of things and stories that you can relate to these 4 principles that are nonpartisan, right? And then start to connect all of your issues with those ideas and say, well, look, that's why I think public education is important. Right? I think public education is important because it's, you know, it's what we do through our democracy to care for others, not just ourselves. It's fundamental to our freedom, because you can't be free if you don't have a really good education, and that you know what's possible in life, and et cetera, et cetera. So you kind of get to the idea. So feel free to you've been wonderful. Thanks for the feedback as I was working through the tech thing. Not sure why that PowerPoint thing was so fidgety. Thinking it might have just been a server or website thing. So anyway, feel free to ask questions. And as if you're typing questions, if you want to ask a question, as you're doing that, I just want to reinforce this idea that it's all about community and what's effective in getting your message out there. Because I think you're all capable of doing some good messaging. And again, feel free to email me if you have questions. But there are some practices we need to get better at. And there's this idea of direct outreach as opposed to TV radio ads. Get out there and have personal contact with people. From your campaigns, from your friends, from your neighbors, people who are supportive of you as a candidate or you with your organization, get out into the community. And a Facebook group is not necessarily a community. It's a very small community. Get out into the community itself. And then I think the last three are the most important. Be a positive promoter of your values and share those with others with a positive message that provides a hopeful future based on your values. So people connect hope with your values, and then the idea of having message focus and discipline, which can be tremendously difficult at times. But message focus and discipline is really important, especially because at some point you're going to be attacked. And when you're attacked or your organization is attacked as being a bunch of liberal elitists or being just a bunch of hippies or whatever the meme is that you get attacked with, how are you going to respond? Are you going to respond in your opponent's frame, or are you going to stay focused on your positive message? So there you go, some good strategic ideas. And I want to put the word out to all of you first, since you're subscribers. So I'm starting to put together materials and ideas with help from Mike McCabe and Nate Tim for Train the Trainers workshops, kind of following up on what we're doing with the Progressive Freedom Campaign in areas where I've already been and conducted workshops, is this idea of train the trainers. So I'm putting together materials and presentations and website stuff as resources for people who get trained, and the qualifier will be is you have needed to take one of the foundations of framing workshops, one of the half-day workshops, which I think most of you have, and a lot of people have at this point. So planning on doing probably one in the northern part of the state, one in the southern part of the state to start, thinking like Stevens Point, Wausau area, and then Madison area initially, or southeastern Wisconsin, depending on where the need is. So in a week or two, I will send out kind of a survey email of who's going to be interested. Okay, so feel free to express your interest here as well. Planning on that, and basically what the vision, just so you all know, is that having people who can train others in different parts of the state can serve as resources to grassroots organizations, campaigns, and just having pockets of people even for writing letters to the editor, so that there's a lot of resources out there to do this right. And that's how we start changing public discourse. So there we go. Thanks for all of your patience as we did the tech stuff. I'm going to go through and work out what the issue was and try to figure that out Looking for something for remote. Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm going to work out something on the website for that. So there can be pretty much any of the materials can be done online, and webinars can do remote. So I have no problem with that. And I would say even people could, you know, oh, thank you, Steve. Thanks for that. And Gail, to your point, I think, you know, what I could probably do is even when we do the workshop is people could Skype in or something like that, you know, to Skype in and participate remotely. I'm sure we can figure that out too. So technology is wonderful when it works well. So thanks all for your participation. Oh, one more in there. Yes, yep. We'll definitely follow up on that. So have a great night. We covered a lot tonight, so feel free to email me. I'm sure you'll be thinking of things. Oh, there is a question. Candidates that don't seem progressive. Yeah, that's really true, Don. You know, and that's actually a function of the bully pulpit kind of thing. I mean, that's why Sanders was so effective, was because he used the bully pulpit to really get that frame out there and reinforce it. And I can stop screen sharing now. Let me screen sharing so we can see each other. There we go. So yeah, I mean the idea of the bully pulpit is really powerful, because then you see how that frame, you know, really kind of filled up the room when Bernie was there, and then kind of swept across the country. And in the absence of it, when you have a Democratic candidate that is evoking conservative values on occasion, right, and then sometimes evoking progressive values, so you get these mixed messages, it is hard. But I think locally, to what other people have said in these workshops we did, and even tonight, for example, what Steve and Nancy were saying, was that locally, you can have an impact locally by evoking these values, and you know, that's where we can start the change. So, and it's a good question about Feingold. You know, I've said all along he's biconceptual. You hear him evoking conservative ideas on the economy, even in terms of speaking out against TPP. There are conservative ideas about the economy evoked, and obviously on a vast majority of issues besides the economy, he evokes strong progressive values. I think that overall people understand him as being progressive, so that helps in terms of framing, but he could really take it over the top by being consistent. And again, that's not who he is. I mean, I had done a blog a while back that looked back at his electoral history and things that he said on the economy going way back to his first elections. And he does, you know, have kind of a conservative view of economics, not in terms of conservative economic system, but in terms of metaphors and framing and ideas. So, you know, I think there's a really good chance of Feingold wins. Actually, irrespective of who gets, whether it's Trump or Clinton, I think there's a strong chance that he gets elected, because even for a conservative, Johnson is very weak. And you can't be, as George Lakoff said, you can't be the strict authoritarian figure and be weak. And Ron Johnson comes across as being weak, and I think that's just kind of a gut feeling people have about him. So I don't think he does well, irrespective of who gets elected president. So I think the fact that Feingold is progressively more strong, and people really perceive him as being for the people, irrespective of the attacks against him. So yeah, I feel pretty good about that prediction. So, all right. Well, thanks everybody. I don't see any more questions up in the queue. So thanks for your participation. And good questions, good discussion, and going to end the recording and hope to see you all very soon. Thanks.